You may be seated. Good morning, everyone. We're so glad to have you all with us here today to conclude our celebrations of achievement by recognizing 4 distinguished alumni. Since Jules' Achievement Day tradition began in 1944, the college has honored nearly 400 alumni who are leaders, thinkers, innovators, and doers. Each year, our Citation for Achievement honorees credit Jules' high standard of learning, as well as our caring faculty for setting them on a path to success. I would invite the William Jewell College faculty to stand and be recognized for inspiring our students. We are so pleased to have some past Achievement Day honorees in attendance this morning. These are individuals whose lives have provided inspiration for our students and for so many in our community. Will all previous Citation for Achievement honorees please stand so we may celebrate you? We are also deeply privileged to be joined today by the Honorable Roy Blunt, who is a champion for private higher education nationally and in Missouri. Senator Blunt has long been a good friend to William Jewell, and the trustees and I are grateful for all the ways in which he has supported our various endeavors in the last several years. We're delighted that he is our convocation speaker this morning. Finally, I wish to recognize our Board of Trustees who are committed to ensuring that our students have the opportunities and the resources that they need to be successful. They are remarkable individuals, and Jewell is certainly a better place because of their leadership. Would our trustees in attendance today please stand and be recognized? And now, Dr. Ann Dima, Provost of the College, will introduce some of our exemplary students.
Good morning. Today, we recognize not only our alumni honorees for distinguished achievement, but also undergraduates who have excelled. Students ranked in the top 10% of their class and who have completed at least 60 credit hours at William Jewell College qualify for induction into Phi Epsilon Honor Society. Their names are printed on the last page of your program. This year, several of our new members are studying at Oxford University since their junior year abroad was delayed, so they're not with us today. But will those other new members of Phi Epsilon please stand to be recognized? Congratulations. You've worked hard on the Hill. We're very proud of you, and we know great things await you. Trustee Jason Klum could not be with us today, but Mr. Adam Sachs, Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer for the Kansas City Royals, will come forward to introduce today's guest speaker.
Good morning. If you're glancing at your programs, you might note that my name is not Jason Klum, but I am more than happy and really quite honored to be able to stand in for Jason this morning and introduce your keynote speaker, United States Senator Roy Blunt. Like Jason, I have personally and professionally known Senator Blunt since long before some of the rookies who just arrived at the Kansas City Royals spring training camp in Arizona were even born. And while my politics do not necessarily square with those of Missouri's senior senator, I can say without hesitation that Roy Blunt has been a shining light in the Congress and one of the most effective and constructive legislators ever to represent the state of Missouri and Washington. This audience in particular should appreciate that Roy Blunt is also, and this is something we frankly need much more of in Congress, a former school teacher and a true student of American history. As the Senator winds down his illustrious political career later this year, I'm quite sure that history will look back at Roy Blunt with admiration at the work that he has done, not only for Kansas City and the state of Missouri, but for our entire nation. When community, cultural, and academic institutions have looked for help from Washington, Roy Blunt has consistently and repeatedly been there for them. If you want to know more of the details, just ask someone you know who's been involved with the Urban League of Greater Kansas City, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library and Museum, or William Jewell College for that matter, and they will no doubt rave about the numerous ways in which the Senator has worked across partisan and political divides to make a difference for these important institutions in our region. When Roy Blunt was serving as House Majority Whip during the throes of the 2008 economic crisis, the whip managed to convince his colleagues to set aside their partisan differences and enact critical legislation to help stabilize the financial markets and lift our nation from the brink of financial ruin. And during one of our nation's darkest hours, in the aftermath of the January 6th attack on our United States Capitol, Missouri's senior senator stood alongside most, but certainly not all, of his colleagues to perform the seemingly ministerial yet deeply profound act of certifying the election of Joe Biden as the 46th President of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure and high honor to introduce to you Senator Roy Blunt, a proud Missourian, one of my favorite Republicans, and a true American patriot.
Thank you all. Well, thank you, Adam. Great to be with you. Adam is a good friend of mine. I never thought I'd be introduced by anybody as important as the chief counsel of the Kansas City Royals. I mean, how does it get better than that? If you're thinking your career strategy out there, this wouldn't be a bad place to have at the top of the list of what you might want to do as you look forward at your career. I was actually looking forward to seeing Jason Klum, who's one of the trustees here, who I also know well. Whenever Jason, a William Jewell graduate, was the head of the General Services Administration for the district that includes our state, we got involved in a really big project where there was a facility at Bannister in Kansas City that Senator Harry Truman had been instrumental in initiating that facility in the early days of World War II to basically come up with all the new weapons and things we were coming up with. It's called generally in the federal government the factory. Well, you can imagine after 70 years of the factory being there, what that site must have been like. But Jason Klum became the point person in figuring out how he could convince me to help figure out how to get the money to clean up that site, take down the fence that had been built around the site so nobody would get in there and get hurt, and turn it into what's going to be one of the great multimodal hubs of warehouse and transportation and jobs anywhere. That's what GSA does. And by the way, yesterday I talked to another William Jewell graduate, Robin Carnahan, who's the head of the General Services Administration right now and has those kind of responsibilities for the entire country. President McLeod-Walls, wonderful to be here with you. Good to be with you and your colleagues in private higher education the other day in Washington. This is a critically important time for private higher education. I think it's under attack in ways we haven't seen since World War II. In fact, one of the amazing decisions made at the end of World War II, maybe not as amazing as important, important's probably a better word, the most important decisions made after the war was that we'd take the GI benefits and GIs could take those and they could go to any accredited institution. That became the model for all of the federal assistance in higher education, mostly used by the Pell Grant right now, and I've had some ability to get involved in both expanding the Pell Grant and making the Pell Grant, getting it back to where it was a year-round grant so people that were in school that had a pattern that was working could stay in school. But the point that Elizabeth and I were talking about with her colleagues, the President and I were talking about with her colleagues, is this is really the time to step up and be sure we don't break that pattern. One of the reasons that American higher education is the strongest higher education system in the world is that we've given students the choice to take the federal assistance they had and go to any accredited institution. Those institutions aren't accredited by the federal government. They're accredited by the institutional organization that they've put together to decide what meets the standards to be an accredited school. And every time, if you've listened to the political discussion of the last couple of years, you hear somebody talk about free first 2 years of college or free college. Well, first of all, if you want to really make college expensive, make it free. And we've seen many instances where the government takes something over and suddenly the costs just shoot right through the roof. But free college education, first 2 years, always, if you look carefully at what's being said, that discussion has always been free public college education. You know, the ability of William Jewell and schools like William Jewell to go to a student that has assistance and needs assistance and say, here's what else we can do to help you put a package together that works for you, and here's why we think our university is the right place for you. Here's why we think our college is the right place for you. Here's what we think we can do for you besides just ticking off the box of the credit hours that are critically important. But that's not all of the higher education experience. It also allows a student to go to William Jewell and say, if I could possibly get in here, I'd like to come here. What can you do to help make that happen for me? So it's an incredibly important time. This is no time, as I told the independent college presidents the other day, to manage to the end of your contract, because you could probably do that, but by the end of your contract, this discussion may have gone so far that the strength of the system is lost. So I'm glad to be here today for lots of reasons, but I'm glad to be here for what's being talked about today. I want to talk a little bit, and just for a few minutes, about the power of example. Example really matters. And that's what this whole event today is about. It's a lot of what happened last night in a similar event that got ready for the event today. The power of example. They're going to be recognized in a different way and with a lot more detail, but we're going to recognize today a member of Missouri's highest court, healthcare, IT, innovator, and executive, a gifted communicator, an academic leader, the head of this huge, important, not-for-profit charitable organization in Kansas City, the Kansas City Area United Way. And we're going to recognize those because it's important to think about how your life can develop in a way that has those same kind of characteristics. You know, I've had a chance twice now to be the chairman of something we do as a nation that's probably our biggest power of example moment. Two different times I've been in charge of the presidential inauguration, in 2016 and again 2017, again in 2021. And that's a job that starts about 6 months or 8 months before the inauguration itself. We form a joint committee of the principal 5 or 6 congressional leaders. They then elect a chairman, and basically the chairman then becomes the person who decides from that point on how we're going to pursue this great opportunity to not only have a peaceful transition in power in our country, but also to give an example to the world of what that's like. And you have all of security concerns. This is probably the most vulnerable time for our government, the inauguration of a president. You've got the entire Supreme Court, as a rule, is there. Most of the Congress is there. The outgoing and incoming cabinet members are there. Obviously, the incoming president, almost always the outgoing president. The Every former president that could possibly get there with their spouse is always there. You want to come up with an attractive target for the adversaries and enemies of the United States. You've got all those people there, and you've got them outside on tons of plywood and lumber that are constructed just for that event. But they're there for a reason. They're there because they have a sense of what the message is to the world at that moment. President Washington believed that the inauguration of the second president would be more important than his inauguration. The students particularly want to think about that a minute. Why would that have been the case? Why would the inauguration of the second president be more important than the inauguration of the first? A lot of people have been sworn in to take over governments. It's sort of like when George III heard that George Washington had resigned as the head of the army and had gone home after the Revolution. George III couldn't believe it because everybody assumed George Washington would become the king. Certainly George III assumed you'd be the king if you could. And when he was told George Washington had resigned at the Congress that was sitting then in Annapolis and gone home, he still doubted it, but as he doubted it with a quizzical sound in his voice, he said, if that's true, he is the greatest man alive. George Washington then, as president, understood that the inauguration of the second president was a bigger deal than the first person taking over the government. That had happened often. Handing the government to somebody else hadn't happened very many times. And he thought the inauguration of his predecessor would be more important than his inauguration, and it was, and frankly, the inauguration of the third president, Thomas Jefferson, even more important, because that was the time when really one group gave up control of a government to a group of people they thought would handle the government much differently than they had. Like is often the case in America, it didn't turn out to be all that differently, but it was certainly different, and it was certainly a crisis moment, and we met the moment. President Reagan in 1981, when he was speaking at that inauguration, says, what we do here today is both commonplace and miraculous. Commonplace because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. Miraculous because we've done it every 4 years since 1789. 100 million people watched the inauguration live. 100 million people watched the inauguration live, and millions of other people watch all of it or part of it after that. We create that example of what it's like, the peaceful transition of power. What a true democracy really does and how it does it. A little clunkier this time, as it has on occasion been than other times, but 2 weeks after January 6th, I was standing at exactly the same spot at the podium where my staff had texted me 2 weeks earlier and say, rioters are fighting the Capitol Police on the inaugural platform. So this time it was maybe even more important to show not only did we finish the work that my friend Adam Sachs talked about on January the 6th, but we completed our example to the world on January the 20th. Our founders didn't say in the Constitution we're going to have a perfect union. Perfect's pretty hard to do. Only one perfect life, only one perfect person in the history of the world. But we're searching always for a more perfect union. The power of example matters. St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times. If necessary, use words.
Good morning. I'm Bill Gautreaux, Chair of the William Jewell College Board of Trustees and a proud alumnus. It's a great pleasure for me today to lead our community in celebrating the achievements of our distinguished honorees. Before we start, I also want to acknowledge the 2022 Critical Thinker of the Year Award recipient that was awarded last night to Karen Daniel. Listening to Karen Daniel talk about her life and critical thinking was a very moving and meaningful experience. So I want to congratulate Karen again and would entertain a round of applause. Now, to today's honorees. Our first honoree will be M. Tyler Griffin, presented by Dr. Ryan Stahl. Our second honoree will be Dr. Corrine Dawkins Jackson, and is presented by Debbie Chasteen. Presenting the Honorable W. Brent Powell is our own Dr. Gary Armstrong. And presenting Chris Rawson is Dr. Tom Van Sage. After each honoree is introduced, the honoree will be presented with the framed citation and then share personal insights. So thank you all for being here today, and let's get started.
Standing in honor of Tyler Griffin this morning are his mother, Sue Griffin, his aunt, Janet Hawkins, and his cousin, Ashley Hawkins Holman. Students, faculty, and alumni, please stand as I list your organization or major. Also standing with Mr. Griffin today are students representing his varied interests and activities, and his major, including the members of Kappa Alpha Order, Interfraternity Council, Prior Leadership Fellows, Campus Union Activities, first-year student mentors, members of the class of 2001, students majoring in business administration, students majoring in psychological science, faculty members of the Department of Business and Leadership and the Department of Psychological Science, and all other faculty and retired faculty who taught Mr. Griffin. Thank you. You may be seated. Tyler Griffin and I first met a quarter century ago. For those of you who follow the local chronology, that was in the 149th year of William Jewell and the second year of the Responsible Self. I was his instructor in the newly created class of that name, which was also the name we had given to our new core curriculum, more recently rechristened as Critical Thought and Inquiry. It has been our common task as teachers and students to study and to live the aspiration to responsible selfhood while avoiding the pitfalls of pretense and cliché. With much work and overcoming some obstacles, we have cleared the ground and been granted the light to see that it is working, and that a community of critical thinking is our living as well as our literal trademark. As a tree is known by its fruit, so a college is known by its alumni. Today's honorees and those before them provide the luster in which we all bask. In my own experience as a professor, Tyler Griffin stands at the forefront of that inspiring legacy. Consult the program for his many accomplishments, his rapid rise, and his deep roots in business, philanthropy, and civic associations. Let me focus for a moment on Tyler as a person, his calling, and his model for all of us. In his bearing and in all his activities, Tyler radiates an effortlessness that has in fact been achieved through hard, unremitting work, and a calm that has been won through discipline and forethought. He is an active, engaged listener, quite unlike those for whom listening is merely a pause between moments of self-expression. Tyler is truly a peer to everyone he speaks to and works with. He is not intimidated by the mighty and does not condescend to the humble. As a result, his respect is invariably reciprocated. Lifelong learning is easier to endorse than to achieve. It is not a lonely personal avocation pursued in the gaps between more pressing tasks. Tyler's example demonstrates that it is a way of life, binding the generations and all those who find themselves at different levels of a hierarchy. He teaches and leads because he follows his curiosity and learns from it. This is Tyler's great contribution in business and in philanthropy, in his fraternal order, and in the life of our college. We inherit the tradition, we transmit the tradition, we are the tradition. That is the calling of Tyler Griffin. Some of us are here today on the verge of retirement, while many of us have not yet launched our careers. All of us can learn from Tyler that these are not separate stages, but parts of a seamless whole, in which responsibility and opportunity are always challenging us in the moment, and in which our gratitude for the past supports our responsibility for the future. My confidence in the future rests on trust in the model of leadership exemplified by Tyler Griffin. For accomplishments and contributions in the fields of healthcare, information technology, business administration, and leadership, William Jewell College is honored to present to M. Tyler Griffin this citation for achievement.
Dr. Stahl, thank you for that very kind introduction. Good morning. President McLeod-Walls, Senator Blunt, members of the Board of Trustees, faculty, staff, students, and guests. I just want to say what an honor and privilege it is to be here with you all this morning and receiving the citation for achievement. I'd also like to congratulate my fellow honorees who I've got to know better over the past several days. It's been a real pleasure. I'm not often surprised, but I was shocked when Susan Tiedemann called me to let me know I was being achieved. And even after 3 days, I'm still somewhat in disbelief, but I saw my name on the frame certificate, so I assume, despite how I do this morning, delivering my remarks, they're not going to take it away from me. Before I start my talk, though, I'd like to acknowledge some special people. My mom, who was with me on my first journey to Jewell 25 years ago. My Aunt Janet, who last night told me she's been to all 3 of my graduations and now this. So I'm not exactly sure how I was supposed to take it, but I'll take it as a compliment. And my cousin Ashley, who's been with me all along the way. There are 4 people who are not here with me today that I'd like to acknowledge. 3 of them are KAs, and also former Achievement Day honorees. Bill Dreyer, who's in San Antonio and couldn't be here today, and Russ Creason and Vance Rule, who are no longer with us. These 3 men took a special interest in me many years ago, and I'm incredibly grateful for their mentorship and their friendship. And finally, my dad, who we lost 10 years ago this month, who wrote me a letter every week during my freshman year. Okay, here goes. My remarks this morning will be a summary of just 3 of the many lessons I learned thanks to my experience at attending Jewel. And those lessons are: take care of people, be humble, and take risks. These aren't new ideas or novel concepts, but perhaps the context I put around them will help you connect them to your own experiences. So let's get started with taking care of people. I remember we were in the Florida Everglades for our Outward Bound trip. It's January in South Florida, so it's warm, but it gets a little chilly at night. And something happened, and one of our teammates actually fell into the water. Now, we got her out, but she almost immediately went into a mild state of hypothermia. Of course, we had to get her dry and out of wet clothes, and then we all just surrounded her in a giant, big group hug until she stopped shivering and her body temperature got back to normal. It's a simple story where a person was in need, and we all took action to avoid what could have become a much worse situation out in the elements in the middle of nowhere. When I think about applying that lesson today, it doesn't have to be quite so extreme, but it's a good reminder that if people need help, whether at work, in our communities, in our families, there's always something you can do to take action and make things better. Second is, be humble. I came to Jewel thinking I was a pretty good writer. I'm sure a lot of you did too. I'd even won a few awards in high school for my writing, which actually allowed me to attend a leadership conference right here at Jewel. Well, I was quickly disabused of that notion. And it wasn't just in one class, it was in all of them during my first year. Intro to Business, Responsible Self, Written Communication 101. Whether it was structure, which we had to learn in written comms, connecting your ideas to your conclusions, Responsible Self taught me that, or just getting to the point with facts and not feelings, that was Intro to Business, I had to reevaluate my whole approach to writing. The lesson here is that you may have built a strong skill set, and then the situation changes on you. Don't get defensive and think, I'm good at this, so they must all be wrong. Instead, stop, look around, ask what I can learn from this, and I promise you you'll get better. Dr. Stahl will have to tell you if my writing improved. Finally, take risks. I studied abroad my junior year in England at Harlexton College. Now, on the whole, going to England for a semester with a bunch of your friends in a country where they speak English doesn't necessarily sound risky. I'll admit it. But that's just the beginning. Staring at that customs officer for the first time, asking why you're going to be in the country for so long, only to remember that the letter you were supposed to present in anticipation of this question was actually in your checked baggage, was a little scary. Or hiding in the dining car of a train somewhere in the middle of Europe because you're not exactly sure you have a ticket for this particular journey was a little nerve-wracking. But it really comes down to just making the decision to put yourself out there and being open to whatever might happen. Like going on a trip to that city you really wanted to go to, but no one else wanted to go with you. So you end up going by yourself. You book into a hostel only to find out you're actually sleeping on a boat. But you meet new people, you experience new things, and you have memories for a lifetime. It might sound cliche to consider that one decision can actually change your life or set you on a trajectory that results in everything you've done or achieved 25 years later, but attending William Jewell was exactly that for me. My freshman year roommate, who I was actually just skiing with earlier this week in Park City, so yes, you actually do make friendships for life at Jewell, he was telling me about his internship at Cerner, a company I had never heard of, while we were catching up at the start of our senior year. I applied there amongst a few others, and that was the job I ended up taking. And I actually, here's a little advice for the seniors. I wanted to have a job landed before spring break, so that's one more piece of advice for you. That initiated a 20-year career with a company that had 3,500 associates when I started, and that's nearly the size of the team I manage today, in a company that's grown to almost 30,000 associates worldwide. Along the way, I've taken some risks and actually moved back to England for a few years and also moved to New Orleans, which can actually be a little riskier and scarier than living in London. But with every career progression, I've tried to be humble, check my assumptions around what got me to where I was, might not get me to where I'm going next. And you have to be open to learning and constantly reevaluating yourself and the environment. My entire company is experiencing that right now as we contemplate what it's going to be like becoming a part of Oracle. And I couldn't have done any of this without taking care of people, because I've had people taking care of me. William Jewell has been foundational to my success. I had great teachers, great experiences, great friendships, and great opportunities. And I know one day all of the students in here will look back and say the same. Thank you.
I found it in the hearts of the people. And so there were countless others who instilled academic excellence in me, rigor and hard work. Jewell taught me to spread my wings, to soar academically, and to impact lives of those around me. My alma mater not only invested in me personally and educationally, but spiritually. The Christian principles upon which William Jewell was founded strengthened my spiritual development. The chapel services, the weekly vespers, the Black Student Fellowship, Bible studies, and the gospel choir, the numerous Christian retreats to Windermere and Glorieta, all helped to strengthen my faith in God. I never forgot Yates Student Union, because it was there that I met the love of my life, my now husband, Dr. Reverend Chris Jackson. He was invited to William Jewell to speak to students and to recruit students for a statewide conference, and he recruited me for life. Over 28 years of marriage has produced 3 fine, outstanding young adult sons. My first, Joshua, who is living in Virginia, and his lovely bride, Deja, is here with me, and I'm so grateful that you guys are here. Julian, who could not make it, my second son, he's at Tennessee State University working. And of course, my third son, Jemiah, who is here, and he is serving as a behavioral specialist in Northwest Passage in Wisconsin. So they came all this distance to be with us today. So thank you, guys. I also want to say Margaret Moore was one of my classmates, and she was here at William Jewell with me. Thank you, Margaret, for coming. William Jewell's Latinized college motto, De Officiis Labora, which means trust God and work, has been my inspiration throughout my life. The seed of trust in God was when I first came to William Jewell. I enrolled in the nursing program. That seed, 2 years into the program, I was told that we were going to start clinicals that Monday, and we needed a nursing kit. I did not have the $50 to buy the kit, so I prayed to the Lord for the money. That evening, the doorbell rang. A tall gentleman dressed in a mailman's uniform handed me a letter. I looked down, and there was my name. I looked up to thank him, and he was gone. I looked up the street, down the street, everywhere, could not find this mailman. So I remembered the envelope in my hand. I opened the envelope, and there was a $50 bill and a note that read, "This is from the Lord." God had answered my prayers. To this day, God still answers prayers, and God still do miracles. I discovered that if it is God's will, it is God's bill. So the seed of faith planted at William Jewell was the impetus to believe God for his provision. Currently, as Dean and Minister of the Gospel, the Lord has blessed me with wonderful opportunities to pour into the lives of numerous students who have gone on to become professionals in their field. I am currently recruiting high school seniors from Jamaica to come to the United States to further their education. To my fellow professors, think of each class as an opportunity for a deposit. If you invest love, care, hard work, your students will shine. They will remember your care and openness to engage them, no matter the cultural and racial differences. Investing in students, what you are charged to do by this great institution, and most of all, by God. To the students, I charge you to discover your purpose, fulfill your assignment, study hard, operate in excellence, manage your time, think critically, solve problems, and above all, actively develop your relationship with God. And I also charge you to live out de officiis labora. Trust God and work. Don't worry about your next step after college. Just pray, surrender your will to God, and ask Him to allow you to fulfill the destiny He has for you. President Walls, Alumni Relations Office, Achievement Day Committee, thanks again for honoring me this day. You invested in me, and now I would like to invest in you a tangible dividend check. Thank you for your investment.
Poor Chris Rubrick. Sitting in the front row of that class was not his best choice of the day. I'm not sure his nose will ever be the same. But no worries, Board of Trustees. I brought no basketball today, and I will attempt to grab your attention with old stories of leotards, tutus, and my days gone by at Jewell. Well, it's at this point I'm sure Professor Dick Brown would be looking down at his watch and wondering when I was ever going to transition to some topic or theme. I know my wife over there is thinking that if Dick Brown is not. So without further delay or stories, I will endeavor to impart some thoughts and observations and maybe a little advice on a partial life lived. First, some thoughts and observations. We live in a very, very divided nation and society. A recent Pew Research survey found over half of all Republicans and nearly half of all Democrats believe their political opponents are not just wrong, not just misguided, but immoral. Unfortunately, our societal divisions have spilled well over politics, spurred by misinformation and social media algorithms. The viciousness and discord in our society has invaded our churches, schools, and even our family living rooms and dining room tables. The internet has improved our lives in many, many, many ways, but it has also served as both the fuel and the mechanisms to spread extremism and polarization. You don't have to look far beyond Ukraine to see an example of that. And I'm sure I don't need to tell all of you that this is detrimental, not just for the world, not just for our democratic institutions, but our culture and our way of life. If we can't coexist and come together with certain shared interests and common goals, then the very foundation of our civil society erodes and begins to crumble. For this reason, we must seek to overcome the vitriol and strengthen the bonds that bind us together. When I was at Jewell, I read Democracy in America by Alex de Tocqueville. And for those of you not familiar with de Tocqueville, he was a French political philosopher and historian. He was sent to America by the French aristocratic monarchy shortly after our fledgling democracy was born to examine our democratic revolution and study American society. De Tocqueville spent months traveling around our country attempting to absorb the nature, the fabric, and the character of our people and society. He made many observations during his travels, but many are the source of many different chapters in his lengthy book. But what I remember most of his travels and observations was de Tocqueville's commentary on American individualism. De Tocqueville admired that our country was growing and thriving, fueled by the entrepreneurial spirit of our people who sought to improve their lot in life. But de Tocqueville theorizes individualism could lead to our detriment. De Tocqueville observed that our individualism must be tempered with a sense of common purpose and identity. Quite simply, he cautioned that if we don't have something that binds us together, that brings us together as a people, we will destroy ourselves from within as we fight scrap to chart our own selfish course. De Tocqueville's observations and critiques are more pertinent today than 200 years ago when he penned and authored his book. When I was young, I would frequently complain to my dad when I thought something was unfair or unjust. He would always respond to me, "Whoever told you life was fair?" Now that didn't sound great to the young ear, but it was great advice. While we can't always change the hearts and minds of others, we can look within and change ourselves. We can combat our individualistic nature and public discord by improving our own behavior and our interactions with our fellow man and our fellow students. My advice to you, seek to love everyone. Those you agree with, those you disagree with. Strive to listen, show empathy, care, truly care for others, even those you may distaste or disdain. This does not mean that you should sacrifice your beliefs and values, but you should respect the beliefs and values of others, even if you adamantly and maybe even rightfully disagree with them. In a nutshell, love one another. If we can do that, I have faith and hope that the stability of our democracy and our civil society will be ensured. And you, I, and those that come after us will be better off for it. In a letter to the Corinthians, St. Paul addressed this topic much more eloquently than I could ever do. St. Paul said, "If I speak with the eloquence of an angel, but do not have love, I'm a resounding gong or a clashing cymbal. And if I have the gift of prophecy and comprehend all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have the faith to move mountains, but I don't have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything I own, if I hand my body over so that I may boast to others, but I do not have love, I have gained nothing." St. Paul described love as patient, kind. St. Paul said love is not jealous, it's not pompous, it is not inflated, it is not rude, and it does not seek its own interests, it is not quick-tempered, and it does not brood over injury. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. So there's faith, there's hope, and love. These three, but the greatest of these is love. So my advice to you as you leave here today, I hope you will take St. Paul's words to heart and you love. Thank you very much for this great honor. God bless.
It was a literal 1 in a million chance, I think, that I even made it to college, given the circumstances I grew up in. And so to be here receiving an honor like this is very special, to say the least. As Tom said, I grew up in Kansas City's highest violent crime rate neighborhood. I grew up in a low-income household in a single-parent home, and college was a fantasy, something you saw on TV, something you heard about, but wasn't a tangible reality. I was determined from a very early age that my end point in life would be dramatically different than my starting point, that the predictable outcome that had been laid out for me because of my racial background or my socioeconomic status or the zip code in which I was born would be different, not only for myself, but for future generations. But I wasn't exactly sure what that looked like or what that meant. I found William Jewell because it shared my desire and aspiration for highest achievement. The same aspiration that I had for myself when I walked the campus, when I heard people talk, when I visited with alums. It was very clear that this was a place that believed in excellence in everything, and that's where I wanted to be, what I wanted to be associated with. When I arrived in William Jewell in 2002, I was a first-generation high school grad. I had not a penny to my name, and I had a dream of one day playing in the NBA. Spoiler alert, I did not play in the NBA. When I left William Jewell 4 years later, I was a first-generation college graduate. I somehow was poorer. Thank you, student debt, although the Pell Grant helped. And I had study experience at the University of Oxford. I had traveled on research trips twice to the Middle East. I'd worked as an advisor to the governor of Missouri. I'd received national recognition as a Gilman Scholar, as the first national finalist for the Rhodes Scholarship in William Jewell's history, and as one of the top 20 college students in the country as recognized by USA Today. And so to say that my Jewell experience was transformational is an understatement. Miracles happened for me here. And miracles happen every day, I think, for kids like me and for all of us who take advantage of the opportunities that are presented here. You know, Desmond Tutu one time told me that the Lord works in mysterious ways because he chooses to work through everyday people and the actions that they have, not in supernatural ways, but in courageous, bold action that happens in small and quiet ways every day. And so this is where I'll try not to get emotional, but there's some folks here that were really important to my Jewell journey. And I want to acknowledge them, and if I could, if they would stand when I acknowledge them. The first is Professor Kevin Schaffstahl. Professor Schaffstahl taught me that leadership is not a position, but it's a series of actions. And I can't thank you enough for your mentorship and leadership. Can we give Kevin a round of applause? Dr. Michael Cook, would you stand? Dr. Cook, Dr. Cook had a reputation for being very difficult and very challenging, but really what it was is he had high expectations, and he never lowered them for anything, and he never allowed any shortcuts. And in my life, I spent a lot of time talking my way out of trouble, and Dr. Cook never allowed that, and that was exactly what I needed here on campus. He also helped me discover a passion for economics and candidly gave me a lot of tangible language and rationale to some of the macroeconomic shifts that allowed some people in our world to have so very much and me as a young person to have so very little, and that was in some sort of small way very comforting. And I want to thank you so much for your support in my life. Can we give Dr. Cook a round of applause? Dr. Robinson, will you stand up? There's not going to be an easy way for me to get through these words, but I'm going to try, Dr. Robinson. Dr. Robinson, simply put, helped me realize I belonged at Jewel. And there were not a lot of other indicators at that time that was the case. And Dr. Robinson provided a safe haven for me. I had one class with you. I only had one class with you, but you provided such a safe haven for me in being able to process my Jewel experience, to being able to candidly have a listening ear when I was dealing with a variety of challenges on campus. And Dr. Robinson was always in my corner. She helped me sort of, if I were to kind of put it in a nutshell, to transition candidly much of the pain that I experienced as a child and drive it into purpose and find purpose here while during my time at Jewel. I am forever grateful to you, Dr. Robinson. Dr. Robinson is, and I could be wrong on this, and if I'm wrong, I apologize, but is our first and only Black fully tenured professor at William Jewell in our long, illustrious history. And when I think about your leadership, it is truly inspirational. It is truly, you are a trailblazer in so many ways. And I think if we as a campus are serious about being intellectually rigorous and achieving the highest degrees of excellence, the next 100 years should be populated with so many more amazing leaders and women like Dr. Robinson. And so I thank you so much for your leadership. Okay, all right. Got through the hardest part. All right. There's a Zen Buddhist quote that I like that helps guide my life that says that all enlightenment you find on the mountaintop is the enlightenment you brought with you. And when I think about my own life and experience, I learned very little in moments like this of great achievement. I learned every lesson I ever learned deep down in the trenches, in the dark valleys of life, and in the long, arduous roads and climbs up the mountain. And one of the things that I learned in that, if I learned anything, was that persistence is far more important than perfection. Persistence is more important than perfection. To illustrate that point, I want to share a little anecdote. When I applied for the Rhodes Scholarship, there were lots of naysayers and lots of doubters that, that was even something achievable for a kid from Jewell, period, but certainly a kid with my background. And I thought that the path to winning the Rhodes Scholarship was perfection. And I tried everything in my efforts to achieve that in written form. And back in the old days, you couldn't electronically submit applications. You had to print everything out. It was an incredibly rigorous process. It was months and months of preparation, and you had to come up with these packets that were made up of 15 or so letters of recommendation, transcripts, endorsements from the college, and a personal statement. And the personal statement was the most important element of this. This was the piece where you boiled down your whole life's purpose. Imagine like responsible self on steroids. That's what this was about. And this got reviewed, this packet of information got poured over and poured over and poured over and reviewed by countless alumni and I think even some trustees and faculty and staff and myself, of course. This was the most important seminal essay. In my mind, this was the thing that was going to change my life forever. And I remember getting to the completion of that months and months of preparation, and you had to mail these packets off in a hard copy mail, physically mail them, sent them off in the mail. And when I went back home that evening, I thought, you know what? I'm feeling pretty good about this. I feel pretty good about my shots. I liked what I put together. I'm just going to read this essay one last time, right? I'm just going to take one fresh set of, you know what? I want to know what it's like when these people get to read how great I am. I want to sit down and I want to read this document. So I sit there and I'm reading it. Starts out, talks about my childhood and the trauma and turbulence and everything I experienced. I'm like, oh yes, good, I hit it. I put it in there. And it talks about my experience at Jewell and how transformational it was. And I was like, yeah, I'll feel really good about that. I talk how, right at the end of the passage, the very culminating paragraph, I talk about how I'm going to use all of this stuff, all of this sort of experience as a child and this experience on campus, and I'm going to use this to become a committed public servant. Public servant. That's what I left off with. Those were the final 2 words of that statement. And I felt like, man, I really punched it and hit it home. Except I noticed that I had made a glaring typo that wasn't caught by Microsoft Word, wasn't caught by the myriad of reviews. And those final 2 words, public servant, I had left out the letter L in public servant. Public servant. Some of y'all still haven't figured it out, so yeah, ask a neighbor, all right? I can't say those words here at this church, okay? In the end, I was a national finalist for the Rhodes, and it was a big honor for the university. It was a big honor for me, but didn't win the award, and it was crushing. And I remember thinking that it was just another blow. I was kind of tired of taking knocks on the chin in life. And there's another Zen parable that I look to for guidance and support often that talks about 2 men who are climbing 2 separate ladders, and one is on the 2nd rung of the ladder, just barely off the ground, and the other is 20 or so rungs up, much higher. And they ask the shaman, which of the 2 men is the greatest? And he says, whichever one's still climbing. And when I think about my own life, when I think about my childhood, when I think about my time at Jewel, when I think about who I am today, if I were to offer you any advice, it's never stop climbing. Never stop climbing. Whatever somebody says you can't do, push for that thing, achieve that thing. Whenever you have a goal, go after it. Whenever you think you've achieved some sort of success, humble yourself and acknowledge what you haven't achieved. Get better every single day. It's the tools that I use to be a better husband every day. It's the tools that I use to be a better father. It's the tools I use to be a better leader. And yes, it's even the tools I use to be a better public servant today than I was before. Thank you guys so much. It's an incredible honor. I'm really grateful. And Cardinals forever. Thank you so much.
Well, I have the best job in America because I get to stand in the shadow of these distinguished alumni and noble human beings. And I get to see, as Senator Blunt said, how they serve as an example to our students and their future. It is my privilege and the privilege of William Jewell College to be the conduit for that experience at today's event. I want to thank you all for being with us today and participating in this convocation. It's been illuminating and inspiring, and I look forward to learning more about your stories and to seeing how they influence the stories of our students' future. Would you all please join me in celebrating our honorees one last time? If you would just please stand. Come on. Remain standing as our concert choir sings the alma mater. Thank you so much.
Thank you.